The Moto Guzzi V85TT is Moto Guzzi's Dakar-inspired middleweight adventure bike. It pays homage to the V65TT that competed in the Paris to Dakar rallies back in the 1980s. I don't think they ever actually finished one of those rallies, but we'll gloss over that for now. This particular one is a 2020 model year that I bought with my own money after it had been sitting on the showroom floor for over 5 years, since before the pandemic. Now obviously, I bought it because I quite like this motorcycle, spoiler alert, but also I was morbidly curious how reliable an Italian motorcycle is that had been sitting on the showroom floor for over 5 years, completely unused. So we're going to figure that out today, and we're also going to do a little review. This is Out Motorsports. My name is Tyler. Let's go for a ride. So before we go for our ride, we're just going to do a quick walk around. I'll show you around this bike and give you some of the quick specs and features. Starting with the engine, because I believe it's the standout feature of this bike. It is an 853cc air-cooled V-twin. It makes 80 horsepower at 7,900 RPMs and around 60 foot-pounds of torque at around 5,200 RPMs. You would think that because it's this old-school air-cooled design, it's a pushrod 2-valve that it would kind of lump along, but actually it likes to rev quite high. The red line and peak power is only a couple hundred RPM off of the Ducati V-twins. So not necessarily what you'd expect, and we'll get into that later. It has a 19-inch front wheel as opposed to the typical adventure bike 21-inch front wheel, which gives you an indication of how this is a little bit more road oriented, and your 17-inch rear wheel. It has a 32-inch seat height, 32.5 to be exact, and it weighs just over 500 pounds wet. It has Brembo brakes front and rear, 41mm front shocks with adjustable preload and rebound, and the rear also is a monoshock, which is kind of a cool old school throwback design with adjustable preload and rebound as well. You can see that this bike actually has a drive shaft. It's one of the only bikes in this segment that has a drive shaft, which is great for adventure riding. If you really want to log miles on this type of motorcycle, it means that you don't have to service the chain. The only other bike that really would compete with this is BMW's R12 GS. But even the R12 doesn't really have the wind protection and the gas tank design that this has. One of the most interesting things that I find about this motorcycle is despite its old school sort of engineering and design, it has a suite of modern technology. If you've been on an Aprilia or a Piaggio product, you probably recognize this TFT display, and it has the suite of technology that most Aprilias and Piaggio products have. It has multiple ride modes, it has cruise control, it has heated grips. This particular one does not, but these handguards come standard, and it has a lot of different features, also switchable ABS depending on what ride mode you're on. So it has a lot of different features that you wouldn't necessarily expect from an old school retro inspired motorcycle, but they've kind of brought it into the modern era. Lastly, before we get going, I have made a few modifications to this that are worth keeping in mind as we're out on our ride. I have put an aftermarket Puig windscreen on this that is kind of hard to see in the sun, but it's the largest windscreen I could find. Stock, they have, the base model has a very short Dakar style windscreen, and there's also another trim called the V85TT Touring that has an oversized windscreen that is a little bit smaller than this one. So this still is the largest windscreen that I could find for this motorcycle, because I do quite a lot of long trips and touring. The last thing I did, we'll come around here, is I got an aftermarket slip-on exhaust. This is just the rear can. It's a little hard to tell in the lighting, but this is a Mistral exhaust. This exhaust is made just around the block from this motorcycle in Italy. It's also handmade, and I feel like it was a fitting piece to put on this motorcycle. The stock one is a little bit quiet, but still has a really good sound, especially when you start to rev it out. So without further ado, let's go for a ride, talk about how this motorcycle rides and how it has treated me so far in 2 months and just about 2,500 miles. Okay, let's get started on our ride. First off, swinging a leg over this bike, like I said, it has a 32.5-inch seat height. I'm 5'9", I have a pretty short inseam. I have pretty short and stubby legs. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm kind of on my toes here. I can't quite flat foot it without leaning a little bit to either side. But it's not a ridiculously tall and unwieldy ride height. Starting it up, I always say when you start it up on idle, it kind of sounds like an air-cooled Porsche. It has trouble idling almost at times. It kind of hunts for idle, and you hear that valve noise, and that's just all part of the air-cooled engine character and vibe. Today is a super hot day, so we're going to get into what that means as we ride. But let's go, shall we? So I'm starting off on this little gravel bit here, mainly because in my head, this is about the most anybody's going to do with this motorcycle. Just a nice little gravel trail. You can stand up and nice and chill on the pegs. And the suspension soaks it up really nice. Like, you're not going to bottom out over this. These little ruts in the road. You can stand up, the pegs give you a really nice riding position. You don't hit your body on even this bigger windscreen. You can kind of just do your thing. It has multiple ride modes. In off-road, you can disengage the rear ABS. But I don't really have a need for that either. That is our gravel section complete. I would like to do the Mid-Atlantic backcountry discovery route, which I hear is pretty much just that. It's a pretty tame off-road section with just some gravel roads and ruts and bumps. And this comes with 80% road tires, 20% off-road tires. So I wouldn't really want to do any more than that. And as we come up to this stop sign, I want to bring up where the foot pegs are, because these foot pegs, hello sir, V-Strom, Ducati Multistrada, letting this guy go, but we'll talk about the foot pegs a little bit. Where you put your feet down is right where they put the foot pegs, which makes for a great riding position when your feet are up, but it makes things a little bit awkward when you're stopped like this. Depending on the situation, you can put your feet in the front, you can slide up on the seat and put your feet in front of them, or my feet right now are behind. Okay, let's give it a little throttle, shall we? So, you'll notice how it kind of smooths out the closer you get to redline, and this engine, kind of how I spoke a little bit about in the intro, on idle it kind of acts like an air-cooled Porsche, and it putzes about and kind of tries to find an idle. But the higher you rev it, the smoother it becomes and the more it likes to rev. It actually makes peak power at between 78 and 7900 RPM on various dynos, people who've dynoed it. So that's 1,000 RPM past the indicated red line on the tach here, which is pretty high. It has shift lights. They're adjustable shift lights, so when I first picked this bike up, the shift lights were coming on the highway because it revs a little bit high on the highway. But I adjusted them to essentially only come on once I'm about to reach red line, which helps because if you want to make any sort of high-end power, you got to rev it out like that, which is sort of counterintuitive. You think a low-B air-cooled V-twin wouldn't want to do that and it wouldn't like to rev, but these Moto Guzzis do need some revs. So while we're stuck behind this traffic and while we're talking about the engine, I will bring up the fact that it's a hot day. So the indicated temperature on the bike right now is 87 degrees. They say it's supposed to be between like 95 and 100 and humid here today in Northern Virginia. And yesterday was the first day that I had where I was actually able to ride this motorcycle in weather like this. And I will say, you have to keep that high revving nature in mind, sort of. It got super hot, and because this is kind of old school air-cooled with modern engine management to a point, you kind of have to keep the revs up. It doesn't like to be lugged, like necessarily under 2500 RPM if you're really trying to dig out of a corner. I noticed some pre-ignition or pinging, which is a thing that happens when the fuel ignites too fast and the piston and the valves kind of hit each other a little bit, very lightly ping, which isn't a good thing, because if you do it too much, it could mess something up internally. So the answer is, like I'm doing right now, downshift, keep it above 3,500 RPM. So you'll notice I'm already talking about like these little characterful quirks, and that is something that just comes with this type of motorcycle. I've had the opportunity to break in 2 different BMWs from essentially 0 miles. BMW gave me the R1300 GS last year with literally 5 miles on the odometer, and I put 16 to 1800 miles on it. And I had the F900 GS Adventure. I got that with 800 miles on the Odo and put another 1500 to 2000 miles on it. And those aren't quirks that you have to deal with on a modern BMW like that, like a water-cooled modern bike. It's just not something that you have to deal with. So when you hear people talking about Moto Guzzis of a certain era, that's kind of what they mean. Air-cooled engines have quirks. You feel them vibrate a little bit more. You feel the heat on your legs a little bit more because the way that the engine is mounted horizontally across the bike like this. The cylinders are right in front of your legs. The left cylinder is actually a little bit closer to your knee. I'm going to put so that close is how the cylinder is between my knee and the edge of the cylinder. And you feel the heat a little bit more in the left because it's closer. Originally I thought it was because the bike was running a little lean on the left bank for some reason, but then I realized, nope, it's just physically closer to my leg, and the air is literally flowing through the cylinder head and doing its job, but you feel the heat a little bit more. You'll notice another thing. Notice the gear indicator right now? It has one, but there's no gear there. So when you pull in the clutch and kind of sort down through the gears coming up to a stop like that, the gear indicator just doesn't do its job. If the clutch is in, the gear indicator doesn't indicate. And I've ridden 2 or 3 of these motorcycles and they all do it. I don't know if it's a problem that can be fixed, but I'm just going to assume it's normal and it's Italian. And that's yet another quirk / character of an Italian motorcycle. So we're going to a twisty road now, but we got to deal with some of these twisties on the way there. And you'll notice, I mean, I'm not a fast rider. I don't really do track days on motorcycles. This was my excuse to get away from track days in cars and kind of enjoy things at a slower pace. But this bike has a neutrality to it that is very satisfying. You can tip it into corners and it responds the way that it tips like this very well. It likes to lean over, similar to a BMW Boxer. It doesn't change direction super fast. Like if you really want to try to like drag a knee or something, you'll likely drag foot peg before you will knee. But so when you have it really leaned over and you want to go from one big lean to another, you do start to feel the weight of the motorcycle a little bit more. But as far as just wafting through corners at a 7/10 pace, that's when this really feels the best. While we're stuck behind this car and have to work the gearbox a little bit for aforementioned pinging pre-ignition issues, you'll notice, I don't know if you can hear it or if it's happened at all yet, but the gearbox clangs a little bit into gear. It's an audible pop when you upshift into gear, and that is another thing that every one of these motorcycles that I've ridden does. Part of that is definitely due to the drive shaft. There's a certain amount of backlash in the output shaft of the engine that goes to the transmission, but the other reason, most likely, is just straight up due to the type of transmission this is. It's a dry clutch, single clutch transmission, similar to old school BMWs. So airhead and oilhead BMWs had dry clutch transmissions, and that just means that it doesn't share the engine oil with the transmission oil the way that most motorcycles do. Now that we can go at a little bit of a better pace, we're going highway speeds-ish. We can talk about not only how it handles at more of a 7/10 pace, but kind of what the wind protection is like. So this like 60, between 55 and 70 miles an hour is really the sweet spot for this motorcycle. Especially with this windshield on it. The engine sits at an RPM that it's really happy at. And the wind protection feels really good. It just about hits me right above my visor, so just about at the top of my head. And again, I'm kind of short, 5'9". So if you're a little bit taller, your mileage may vary. But for me, it works pretty well. Gets me in a nice little pocket of air on the highway. And like I said, it really just likes to, right here, this transition part, it loves to kind of tip back and forth between corners like that. It's definitely not a drag your knee bike, but it is a 7/10. Enjoy the twisties. These big wide handlebars give you a big, nice feeling of control. And I haven't been leaning on the brakes too heavy, but those Brembos do a good job. They aren't the crazy fancy Brembos that you get on most modern bikes now, but they're good generic Brembo caliper with decent feel on the front, and they're not linked. And like I said, ABS is standard, so if you really need to haul down on them, you have that sort of safety. But this sort of pace, where we just dive back and forth between these little twisty corners on this road, this is the comfortable pace of this motorcycle. If you really start to get on the gas coming out of corners, it enjoys it, but you can't rush it too much. It starts to feel a little bit antiquated that way, but it's still an incredibly enjoyable motorcycle to both take through the corners like that at a decent clip, but also kind of chill when you get stuck behind a car like this. That character and that engine personality is still there. Well, let's talk about how this has treated me since I picked it up. So it's the middle of June right now. I picked this up at the end of March, essentially April 1st. And I've taken it on a bunch of adventures since then. As you can see, it has almost 2,500 miles on it now. I've taken it all through Western Virginia on a 900-mile long weekend road trip. I've taken it up into New Jersey, back home where I used to live, to visit family up on the highway. And there hasn't been a time where this has ever left me feeling fatigued or necessarily wishing I had something different or more high-tech and more modern. This is a very specific motorcycle for a specific sort of person who enjoys a certain type of old school, almost resto mod engineering. And if that's something you like and you're okay with those concessions that I talked about, you know, as far as not having a knock sensor and you kind of have to keep the revs up and feeling the heat come off the bike because the air is the only thing that cools it down, then this kind of sits alone in a segment of motorcycles like that, especially now that the newer like V100 Mandalo is out. That's a water-cooled Moto Guzzi that I haven't ridden yet, but I hear has a completely new and modern feel. It has a wet clutch now. It's a water-cooled engine. So that's kind of like the next big step, and this was the last hurrah, if you will, of these old school air-cooled Moto Guzzi engines. I'm assuming over time they'll all kind of get water-cooled, similar to how Ducati is doing it. Ducati was once famous for their Desmo valve engines, and they were also air/oil cooled V-twins, and they've gone away from that, and now the only bike that you can get an air-cooled V-twin on is the Ducati Scrambler, as far as I know, and that's the only one that you can get the Desmo engine with. So if you're okay with making some concessions like that, then this gives you an incredibly unique experience compared to just about any other bike on the market. So if that sounds like something you would enjoy, then maybe you'll enjoy a V85TT. Clearly, there you go, there's a little ping as I rolled on it and forth. Clearly, I'm enjoying it. I'm not just saying that because I spent my own money on it. I knew what I was getting into. I rode it in California, and turns out $7,200 is a pretty good deal for a bike like this. Would I buy one for MSRP over a Honda Transalp, let's say, a more direct modern competitor? Probably not. I only got this because I bought it so cheap. If I didn't find this so cheap, I would probably be on a Transalp right now. But again, two completely different machines, not an apples to apples comparison. And overall, I'm really enjoying this so far. So that is my review/ownership experience after 2 months, 2,500 miles on my 2020 Moto Guzzi V85TT. If you enjoyed this review, please subscribe. We have more motorcycle reviews to come. And if you want to enjoy and spend time with other LGBTQ motorcycle and car enthusiasts, check us out at outmotorsports.com, where we hold a bunch of in-person rallies and track days where you can meet a bunch of like-minded people and enthusiasts just like yourself. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next time.